All right, today we're jumping into a fascinating economic story. For decades, Ireland played the game of global economics. And honestly, they won big. How? By using low corporate taxes to bring in some of the world's biggest companies. But that huge success came with a hidden price tag. So what happens when the very strategy that made you successful becomes your single biggest risk? Let's get into the high-stakes gamble at the very heart of the Irish economy.
So this is the big question, right? I mean, how did we get to a point where just 10 companies are paying for more than half of the country's corporate tax bill? It sounds like a typo, but it's not. It's the actual foundation of Ireland's public finances. To really understand how this happened, we've got to go back and see the deliberate steps that turned Ireland into this magnet for corporations, and then how that powerful attraction created a risk that nobody saw coming.
Here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at how Ireland created its famous low tax appeal and see how it stacked up globally. Then, we'll dive right into this concentration conundrum, the paradox at the center of it all. From there, we'll analyze the huge risks this creates, and finally, we'll look at how Ireland is trying to build a financial safety net to protect its future.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning, the creation of this economic magnet. You know, the famous 12.5% tax rate didn't just pop up out of thin air. It was the end result of a very deliberate, long-term strategy.
You see, Ireland's low-tax brand took a while to build. Before the 90s, they had this special 10% rate just for manufacturing, which was an early way to attract investment. But the European Union wasn't a fan. They saw it as unfair. So that pressure forced Ireland to make a really big decision. Do we give up this low tax advantage, or do we double down? Well, they doubled down. By 2003, they rolled out the single 12.5% rate for pretty much all trading income, and that became their big, powerful signal to the world. And yeah, recent global reforms have nudged that up to 15% for the biggest companies, but the core strategy is still very much in place.
Now, to really get why this 12.5% rate was such a game changer, you have to put it in context. Let's take a look at how Ireland's rate compares to what other major economies were doing.
And here's where you really see the power of that strategy. While the average developed country was taxing corporations at around 23 or 24%, and places like the UK and Germany were way up at 25 or even 30%, Ireland's rate was radically lower. If you're a global company looking to maximize your profit, that isn't just a small discount, it's a massive, massive competitive advantage. Even with the new 15% rate for the big guys, that gap is still huge. That difference is the magnet.
And you know what? That magnet worked. Oh, it worked spectacularly well. But this is where the paradox really starts to show up. The price of all that success was an incredibly concentrated tax base, which created a new and pretty serious vulnerability.
Just let that number sink in for a second. 52%. Imagine if over half of your personal salary came from just 10 clients. That's the reality for Ireland. It is one of the highest levels of tax concentration in the developed world. It means the country's financial health isn't just linked to these global giants, it's basically tethered to their every single move.
And it gets even more extreme when you zoom in. Just 3 companies, 3, are responsible for almost 40% of all corporate tax. What that really means is that a single bad quarter for one of these firms, or just one strategic decision made in a boardroom thousands of miles away, can blow a very real hole in the budget that pays for Ireland's schools, hospitals, and roads.
So who are these giants anyway? Well, they're mostly in a few key areas. The biggest chunk, 38%, comes from manufacturing. But don't think of old-school factories. This is almost all U.S. pharmaceutical and medical tech firms. Companies whose profits are often tied to things like patents. The next big slice is ICT. You know, big tech. Another industry where profits can be moved around the globe pretty easily. So bottom line, the Irish budget is heavily reliant on a small number of the world's most powerful and mobile American companies.
This whole situation is a classic double-edged sword. It's a blessing that has flooded the government's coffers with cash, for sure. But it's also a curse, because it's built on a foundation that's incredibly shaky. Let's look at the direct financial risks this creates. Just look at this shift. A while back, corporate taxes made up a healthy but manageable 13% of Ireland's total tax revenue. Today, that has more than doubled to 27%. It's now the second biggest source of government income, right behind the income tax paid by every single worker in the entire country. That really shows you how deeply reliant the country has become on a very narrow and, potentially unstable source of money.
Honestly, this might be the best way to picture the risk. The whole national budget, the money that pays for hospitals, schools, everything, is built on this tower of corporate tax blocks. And the most important blocks holding the whole thing up at the bottom,
they represent just a handful of companies. So what happens if one of them gets pulled out? And there are a ton of things that could pull a block from that Jenga tower. The profits themselves are super mobile. They can be shifted with a few clicks. A single boardroom decision in Silicon Valley could redirect billions. Then you've got outside risks. US tax reforms could tempt those profits back home, or maybe the EU brings in new digital taxes. And for that all-important pharma sector, there's the constant threat of the patent cliff. That's when a blockbuster drug's patent expires and its massive profits just fall off a cliff. Any one of these things could be a problem.
So, look, the Irish government knows it's walking a tightrope. They're keenly aware that this boom might not last forever. And that brings us to the final part of our story, their plan to build a financial cushion and get ready for a future that's a lot less certain. The government's plan is to treat all this extra cash not as the new normal, but as a temporary windfall. Their strategy has four main parts. First, save it. They're putting the extra money into sovereign wealth funds. Think of them as national rainy day funds. Second, and this is a golden rule in public finance, they're using conservative budgeting. That means you don't use shaky, uncertain money to pay for permanent costs, like public sector salaries, because if that money suddenly vanishes, you've got a huge political crisis on your hands. Third, they want to diversify their tax sources. And finally, they're working to strengthen all the non-tax reasons to invest in Ireland, like its talented workforce and stable environment.
This quote from the analysis really says it all. We are not talking about a small dip in the budget here. The departure or even just a restructuring of one of these top firms could instantly wipe billions, with a B, from the government's annual revenue. That would force some incredibly tough decisions about cutting spending or raising taxes on everybody else.
And so that leaves us with the big final question. Ireland is enjoying a massive tax windfall right now, but it's completely aware of the incredible risk. They are taking smart steps to save money and de-risk their economy. But when your country's finances are so deeply connected to the decisions made in a few boardrooms on the other side of the world, is any plan ever truly enough? It's a high-stakes economic gamble, and believe me, the whole world is watching to see how it plays out.